Chapter 1 Epilogue. Ludwig Heart was a young man born into wealth beyond imagination, raised in the glittering heart of New York City. His lineage was impeccable. His father, Uri Heart, had carved out a fortune on the brutal battlefield of Wall Street, where cunning and intellect were the only weapons. His mother, the sole heir of the global motor empire known as Stonechild Industries, controlled a vast industrial network that stretched across continents. Together, they formed a powerhouse family, where success was not just expected but inevitable. Ludwig's life, from an outsider's view, seemed perfect. He was surrounded by luxury, an army of maids catered to his every whim, and the mansion he called home was more akin to a palace. His education was entrusted to the best minds in the world. Renowned mathematicians, physicists, and artists, all were summoned to mold Ludwig into the perfect heir, ensuring he mastered everything from the most complex equations to the subtlest nuances of classical music. Yet, with all these privileges came isolation. His friends, if he could call them that, were few and far between, mostly sycophants eager to bask in his family's influence. His life was scheduled to the minute, leaving him little time to experience the world beyond his studies. And while he excelled in every subject, his life felt scripted, leaving little room for personal desires or passions. The only spark of rebellion in his otherwise disciplined existence came when he discovered the world of online gaming and the escapism offered by light novels. His father, who had always dismissed such pastimes as trivial, eventually relented. Ludwig's only request for all his hard work? Just one more hour of free time each day. It was a modest wish, considering he had everything else. But for Ludwig, that extra hour of freedom was more valuable than all the billions in his future inheritance. Now, at 20, Ludwig had grown into a striking figure. His tall, lean frame, honed by stolen moments in the gym, towered at 6'3". His sharp features, slicked-back black hair, and a carefully groomed goatee gave him an air of refinement, though his pale skin hinted at a life spent mostly indoors. Despite his parents' disapproval, his choice to grow facial hair was one of the few personal decisions he had made, symbolizing his quiet rebellion against the expectations set upon him. However, despite his physical transformation and academic prowess, Ludwig still felt like a boy lost in a world he didn't fully belong to. The only thing missing from his charmed life was the one thing money couldn't easily buy: genuine connection. A spark of romance, a story of his own. Something that wasn't dictated by his family's legacy or corporate strategies. His 20th birthday, however, was about to mark a turning point in his life. Unlike the previous years, where his father threw extravagant, exclusive parties attended by high-profile figures far older than Ludwig, this year was different. His father had arranged for the celebration to be held in Boston, hosted by one of his mother's relatives, and this time, the guest list included people his age. For the first time, Ludwig was going to mingle with peers, other children of wealth and influence, people who might just see the world the way he did, or perhaps challenge it. The thought of it terrified him. He wasn't sure if his online gaming buddies could prepare him for the real-life challenge of interacting with his social equals. His palms grew clammy as the private jet cut through the sky, carrying him to what felt like an entirely new world. His heart raced, not with the excitement of the celebration to come, but with anxiety over how he would manage to hold a conversation, to navigate the social battlefield of his peers. Would he be able to blend in? Or would they see through him, the boy who had been kept away from the world, shielded by his family's vast fortune? As the jet hummed along, the world beneath him shrinking into nothingness, Ludwig couldn't help but wish the flight would never end. The uncertainty gnawed at him, louder than the drone of the engines. For someone who had mastered every challenge thrown at him, academic or physical, the simple prospect of talking freely with others his age felt like scaling an impossible mountain. Yet what Ludwig didn't know was that this very trip would be more than just another birthday party. His future, so carefully planned and polished by his parents, was about to take a drastic, unexpected turn. His small, innocent wish for more time to be himself was about to come true, but in ways he never could have imagined. Mainly because the jet was now in free fall. Chapter 2 Dead Again. Ah, it hurts. What happened? Ludwig groaned, his voice barely a whisper as he stirred. His body felt heavy, like it had been dragged through the depths of hell. His head throbbed, every pulse of pain a reminder that something had gone terribly wrong. Blinking against the oppressive darkness, he tried to piece together the fragments of his memory, but everything was jumbled. A chaotic blur of screaming, shuddering metal, and a violent, terrifying descent into nothingness. The last thing he remembered was the plane, the craft shuddering so violently it felt like it would tear apart. His father's voice, panicked for the first time in Ludwig's life, calling out to his mother. His mother's scream, raw and piercing, cutting through the chaos. Then, darkness. And now, more darkness. But something was wrong. The pain, the broken bones, the agony of the crash, none of it was there. He wasn't lying in twisted metal or engulfed in flames. There were no scattered seats, no twisted wreckage, no smell of burning fuel. Instead, he felt something cold, something hard beneath him. A stone floor. He strained his eyes, trying to make sense of the shadows around him, but the only light came from small, flickering flames in the distance, like forgotten embers scattered across a desolate plain. "Dad? Mom?" Ludwig's voice echoed back to him in the vast emptiness, swallowed by the oppressive silence. There was no response. Just his own ragged breathing. A chill crept up his spine. This wasn't right. His heart raced as panic clawed at his chest. Where was the plane? Where was the fire? Where was his family? Suddenly, a series of garbled sounds pierced the silence. Plus, asterisk 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 dollar 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 at. Ludwig whipped his head around, his heart pounding in his chest. The words, if they could even be called words, were unintelligible, more like static or a broken transmission. His blood ran cold. Automated translation initiated. A voice echoed in his mind, emotionless and robotic, snapping Ludwig from his confusion. The voice sounded disturbingly artificial, hollow and devoid of any human warmth. "What?" Ludwig breathed, his chest tightening. No, this can't be happening. His mind raced, his thoughts spiraling into disbelief. He'd read about situations like this, isekai stories, where characters were thrown into other worlds. But that was fiction, an escape from the suffocating reality of his high society life. This was real. And it was impossible. A soft chime echoed in his head, and a glowing blue screen appeared before him, hovering in midair. Initializing transmigration, Ludwig Heart. No. Ludwig's voice rose in panic, shaking the emptiness around him. His breath came in short, frantic bursts as he took in the impossible sight before him. This isn't real. It's a dream. It has to be. But the screen remained, indifferent to his denial. Initialization complete. Welcome to the world of echoes, traveler Ludwig Heart. You have been transported to another world. Please read through your status screen before beginning. Ludwig's heart hammered in his chest. He didn't want to believe it, but the words on the screen burned into his mind with an eerie clarity. Another world? It felt absurd, yet the cold stone beneath him and the disorienting void around him were all too real. Before he could process what was happening, two figures emerged from the shadows, their crimson robes flowing like liquid darkness. Their faces were hidden beneath hoods, and long staffs crowned with grotesque skulls were clutched in their hands. The faint, flickering light reflected off their robes, casting them in an otherworldly glow. "Seems like he woke up. Bring it," one of them said, his voice low and menacing. Ludwig's pulse quickened. The men moved with a predatory grace, their steps silent on the cold stone. One of them approached Ludwig, holding a black orb that pulsed with a sinister energy. Panic surged through him as the other man loomed closer, his breath hot on Ludwig's face. "Where am I?" Ludwig shouted, his voice cracking as fear overtook him. Without a word, the robed figure raised his staff and swung it. The thick wooden end crashed into Ludwig's face with brutal force, the impact echoing in the empty chamber. "You have been dazed. 22 HP. A sharp pain exploded in Ludwig's skull, and his vision blurred. His knees buckled beneath him as he fought to stay conscious. "What is this?" His thoughts were a jumbled mess, unable to focus on anything but the searing pain and the surreal events unfolding around him. Was this some sort of kidnapping? A sick game orchestrated by lunatics? "Open your hand," one of the robed men demanded. Ludwig's mind reeled, trying to make sense of the situation. Cultists? Terrorists? None of it explained the floating screens, the strange voice in his head. He tried to resist, but his body, still dazed from the blow, betrayed him. His hand shook as he extended it. The second man placed the orb in Ludwig's open palm, and suddenly, agony. Long, razor-sharp spikes shot out from the orb, piercing through his skin and muscle like molten knives. A guttural scream tore from Ludwig's throat, the pain more intense than anything he had ever felt. His body convulsed as the fiery spikes burned into his flesh. "Please read through your status screen. You do not have much time." The robotic voice pierced through the pain, and Ludwig, barely able to think, willed the screen to appear. Status screen: Ludwig Heart. Health: 72,100. Stamina: 30,100. Mana: 100,100. Intelligence: 15. Strength: 15. Dexterity: 15. Vigor: 15. Luck: 15. Class: Hero. Title: Predestined Hero. One who can save the world. Possessed abilities: Heroes Starter Pack. Passives: Resolve. Negate one negative effect on the bearer. Activates once a day. Overt Genius. Increased proficiency in all sorts of masteries. Heroic Spirit. Strong resistance to demonic temptations and mental ailments. The numbers flashed before him, but his mind could barely process them. The pain, the confusion, it was too much. "Oh, we hit the jackpot. It's a hero," one of the men muttered. "Really?" the other responded, his voice dripping with disbelief. Ludwig's mind spun. How can they see this? He thought of the stories he had read late at night, hidden under the covers. Heroes, status screens, other worlds. None of it made sense, yet here he was, trapped in the very nightmare he used to fantasize about. "The orb is glowing gold," the first man said with a twisted grin. "Here's the real deal." Ludwig's breath came in short, sharp gasps. "What do they want from me?" he thought, his heart pounding in his chest. "Let him go," the second man said. For a moment, hope flickered in Ludwig's chest. "Maybe they'll let me live. After all, I'm a hero now, right? Heroes are supposed to be protected, revered." But that hope was short-lived. "Now kill him," the first man said, his voice cold and final. Ludwig barely had time to register the command before a dagger, gleaming in the dim light, sliced through the air and buried itself deep in his skull. The pain was blinding, a sudden flash of white-hot agony, and then, Chapter 3, "You died. You died." Simple as that. Those two words echoed in the cold, empty space, lingering in the void where Ludwig's consciousness once resided. It was the last thing he saw, etched in blinding, ominous letters against the dark backdrop of his mind. Death, swift and cruel, had claimed him just moments after he arrived in the strange, fantastical world that was supposed to be his grand adventure. There was no epic quest, no heroic victory, only the cold, abrupt end of a life filled with dreams unfulfilled. Ludwig Heart, a teenager of fragile hopes and vast ambitions, had grown up cloistered in a grand, gilded cage. The son of a powerful family, he was surrounded by books that whispered of distant lands, mighty heroes, and impossible wonders. Yet his world was small, confined to the towering walls of his family's palace, where his experiences of life were limited to the occasional, heavily guarded outings to the city beyond. He had never tasted freedom or felt the rush of wind against his face as he raced toward destiny. He had never seen the ocean or climbed a mountain, never loved or lost, and never fought for anything beyond the chessboard battles of his mind. The chance to visit another world had seemed like his escape, his opportunity to become the hero he always dreamed of being. But in that moment, all of that was snuffed out, reduced to a fleeting wish as his heart stopped and the warmth drained from his body. Ludwig's dreams died with him, along with the countless stories that might have been told. Yet, this wouldn't be a story worth telling if it ended so abruptly. Would it? The world was still as two cloaked figures approached Ludwig's lifeless body. The necromancers, their faces obscured by dark hoods, stood over the fallen hero. They waited patiently, unmoved by the stillness, until the last drop of blood had pooled beneath him, darkening the earth in a macabre stain. One of the men pulled out a black leather-bound tome, its cover embossed with runes that writhed like living things, and began scribbling arcane symbols in the air around Ludwig's corpse. The faint glow of the markings cast a sickly pallor over the dead boy's face, creating a haunting contrast to the vibrant life he had once embodied. The writing took an eternity, or so it seemed. Each stroke of the quill was deliberate, precise, and laced with an eerie purpose. When the sigils were complete, the necromancers knelt beside Ludwig, their robes brushing the blood-soaked ground. They drew out gleaming knives, their blades cold and merciless, and began the grim work of extraction. His heart, lungs, liver, intestines, each organ was carefully removed and placed into jars filled with preservative fluids that bubbled and smoked. Nothing that could rot or decay was left behind. Even his brain and eyes were scooped out with practiced precision, leaving only a hollow shell of bone and sinew. The necromancers moved with a ritualistic grace, as though they were performing a sacred dance rather than a grotesque dissection. The air grew heavy with the stench of death, mingling with the faint, acrid scent of the alchemical fluids. The black tome, now resting at the center of the circle, began to glow faintly, the runes pulsing with an unholy light. The necromancers recited incantations in hushed, reverent tones, their voices blending into a haunting chorus that seemed to resonate from another realm. From the darkness of the tome, a purple glow erupted, snaking outwards to form an intricate magic circle around the remains of Ludwig's body. The sacrificial ritual to the god of death, Necro, has begun. We offer this heroic spirit to the god of death. We, your eternal worshippers, beseech you to grant us a mighty undead spirit. Show us the might of your creation, the lead necromancer chanted, his voice echoing with fervor and desperation. The air around them seemed to thicken, charged with the weight of the ritual. The ground beneath Ludwig began to tremble as the magic circle activated. Ethereal arms, ghostly and skeletal, materialized from the circle's edges, reaching out like the hands of desperate souls yearning to escape the abyss. They grasped Ludwig's flesh, ripping it apart with brutal efficiency. Nerves, tendons, and sinew snapped and unraveled, leaving only his bleached bones behind. It was as though unseen forces were stripping away every remnant of his humanity, piece by piece, until only a crude mockery of life remained. But then, something went terribly wrong. Terror. The spirit of a hero conflicts with the undeath ritual. Error. The air shimmered violently as the ritual faltered. The two necromancers froze, their confident expressions replaced by confusion and fear. They had not anticipated this. An error in the ritual of such magnitude was unheard of. Heroic undead had been raised before, so why was this different? What the hell is happening? One of them, a gaunt man with sunken eyes, exclaimed, his voice cracking with panic. It's an error. But why? He was just a hero, wasn't he? The other necromancer stammered, desperately rifling through the pages of the tome for an answer. But the truth was staring them in the face, hidden in plain sight. The summoning circle's arcane language, the complex runes, they had made a fatal, linguistic mistake that would cost them dearly. A heroic undead was not the same as a summoned hero. The former were those who had performed great deeds in life and were reanimated through dark rituals. But a summoned hero was a being blessed and chosen by the virtue gods of Ecos, marked by divine favor and destined for greatness. To attempt to bind such a soul to the will of death was not only an affront to the natural order but a direct insult to the gods themselves. The ground beneath them began to quake violently, as though the earth itself rejected the abomination they were attempting to create. Divine light, pure and radiant, burst forth from the altar, clashing with the sickly purple glow of the death magic. Holy and unholy forces collided, creating a cacophony of light and sound that rattled the very stones of the temple. "We've offended the god of life," one of the necromancers whispered, horror dawning on his face. In a frantic bid to salvage the ritual, he attempted to smear away the runes with his sleeve, while his companion turned to flee. But their actions were in vain. Necro, the god of death, was intrigued by the powerful soul that had been offered to him, and he was not so easily denied. Divine auras clashed, swirling around the altar like a storm of conflicting wills. The gods waged a silent battle, but in the end, the dead could not return to the realm of the living. Ludwig's soul was no longer a thing of purity. It was in the domain of Necro now. A final, resounding pulse of magic settled the dispute. The holy light retreated, leaving behind only the unyielding presence of death. The ritual resumed, and Ludwig's remains began to twitch and stir. Bones, once stripped of flesh, reassembled themselves into a skeletal figure. The reanimated corpse rose, its posture hunched and awkward, a macabre puppet held together by unseen strings. Its empty eye sockets flickered with an eerie blue glow, as though staring out at the world for the first time with a hollow, unseeing gaze. The nearest necromancer gasped in awe. "Oh, it worked, Sebas. It worked. Come back, you cowardly fool," he shouted, stumbling to his feet. The violent clash between the divine and unholy had left him shaken, but with the ritual's completion, hope stirred anew in his heart. Sebas, the other necromancer, who had been halfway to the exit, hesitated. It's actually working. We need to tell the Black Tower Master," he mumbled, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and excitement. A sharp slap to the back of his head snapped him back to reality. "Are you stupid?" the first necromancer hissed. "If he finds out we used a summoned hero for this, he'll kill us. You think he'll be pleased we wasted the chance he's been searching for all these years?" But before they could argue further, a figure emerged from the shadows at the edge of the altar. Tall and imposing, the newcomer wore a long coat of black leather, tailored to perfection and adorned with arcane symbols that pulsed faintly under the flickering torchlight. His youthful face was framed by dark, wavy hair, and his eyes, hidden behind circular black glasses perched precariously on his nose, gleamed with a dangerous curiosity. His smile was wide and sharp, a predator's grin that promised nothing good. "Tower Master," the two necromancers exclaimed in unison, dropping to their knees as terror gripped them. This was not the time to be caught improvising. "I see you've been busy," the Tower Master said, his voice silky smooth as he slowly clapped his hands. The sound was light, almost mocking, but each clap reverberated in the hearts of the kneeling men, sending a shiver down their spines. Chapter 4: Rise of a Skeleton. "Tower Master, we—" "Silence," he roared, cutting them off mid-sentence. The Tower Master's voice boomed through the altar chamber, vibrating with a dark authority that commanded immediate obedience. The necromancers flinched, their faces paling as they cowered under his withering gaze. "You think me a fool?" the Tower Master continued, his tone cold and dripping with disdain. "Did you truly believe that a few wards and crude enchantments would hide this pathetic spectacle from my sight? You've tampered with powers beyond your understanding, and you did so without my permission." The two necromancers quivered, knowing full well that any excuse would only worsen their situation. In the Tower Master's presence, lies and deflections were as futile as running from a shadow attached to your feet. And yet, the Tower Master's voice softened, almost contemplative. He walked around the skeletal remains of Ludwig, examining the failed ritual with a keen eye. "Impressive. You two managed to provoke the very gods themselves. A legendary figure? No, a summoned hero? Such rare beings, their souls marked by destiny, not merely bound to heroic deeds but blessed by divine virtue. It seems even in your incompetence, you've touched something extraordinary." He paused, his expression shifting from intrigue to disgust as he pointed at Ludwig's skeletal form. "But what a waste." His voice carried a weight of bitter disappointment. "You think this is what I wanted? This shambling skeleton? My aim was not to raise a mere heroic undead. I wanted a hero's soul twisted into something far greater, something capable of defying the heavens themselves. And you two have squandered that opportunity with your amateurish grasp of necromancy." The necromancers bowed their heads, trying to appear as small and insignificant as possible. The shame of their failure stung deeply, but it was the Tower Master's biting words that truly cut them to the core. You spent 60 years dabbling in the dark arts, the Tower Master sneered, and you think that makes you worthy of playing with forces that bend the very fabric of existence? You've barely scratched the surface of necromancy, yet here you are, fumbling with spells that defy the laws of the world. You aimed to turn something divine into something profane, and look at what it got you, a pile of animated bones. Pathetic. The Tower Master's reprimand stung like lashes from a whip, each word a fresh cut to their already battered pride. Yet, there was a flicker of hope, a brief moment when his tone shifted, only for it to be snuffed out once more. Still, the Tower Master said, pausing as if to savor the silence, "You've shown a spark of courage, if not recklessness. You dared to act without permission, to take what you learned and apply it in a way that defied my direct orders. That is the essence of true magic, the will to act beyond fear, beyond consequence." The necromancers dared to lift their eyes, hope flickering faintly in their chests. Could it be that they would be spared, even praised? But, the Tower Master continued, his voice hardening like stone. Every act of defiance comes at a price. And that price is punishment. With a swift motion, the Tower Master raised his arm, conjuring a flame as black as night itself. The fire writhed and twisted, consuming the air around it with an insatiable hunger. This was his signature spell, a flame that burned without end, devouring all until either the caster's mana ran dry or the victim was reduced to nothing but ash. The necromancers recoiled, terror gripping their hearts as they knew the flame's touch meant agony beyond death. Yet, before the Tower Master could release the spell, something peculiar caught his eye. The skeleton, Ludwig, moved. Just the slightest twitch of its bony fingers, a subtle, almost imperceptible spark of energy dancing between its thumb and index finger. It was a faint flicker of mana, insignificant by all conventional measures, but it was there, a sign of something more than mere animation. The Tower Master's hand paused, the black flame flickering dangerously before extinguishing in an instant. He adjusted his glasses, his eyes narrowing as he leaned in closer to the skeletal figure. "Interesting, interesting indeed," he murmured, his curiosity piqued as he studied the faint sliver of mana. Sebers, nervously watching from a distance, blurted out, "We haven't mind-controlled it yet. It's still." In a flash, Ludwig's skeletal arm shot forward, lunging toward the Tower Master's throat with surprising speed. The undead's hatred for the living was primal and instinctive, driving it to attack the nearest source of life with relentless fury. The Tower Master, unfazed, caught the skeletal arm effortlessly, holding it in place with a firm grip. He leaned in closer, his expression one of bemused disappointment. "You're still just a mindless creature, aren't you? A shame, really. For a moment, I thought you might be something more." He raised his other hand, pressing his palm against Ludwig's skull. A cold, binding energy pulsed outward, flooding the skeleton's body with an oppressive force. "Bind the body, bind the mind, bind the spirit. Fold and follow, for I am your true master," the Tower Master chanted, his voice laced with a powerful enchantment that seeped into every crevice of the skeleton's being. The blue flames in Ludwig's eye sockets flared to a vivid red, then dimmed back to blue, a signal that the binding had taken hold. The skeletal form ceased its struggle, its defiance snuffed out by the Tower Master's will. It stood motionless, awaiting its new master's command. The Tower Master released the skeleton's arm, dusting his hands off as though he had merely dealt with a bothersome pest. "I suppose I can find some use for you," he mused aloud, his tone indifferent. "Perhaps cleaning my study, fetching books, nothing grand. But you're better than nothing, I suppose." Turning to the necromancers, his smile vanished, replaced by a cold, calculating stare. "As for you too, your insolence has cost you dearly. Clean up this mess, then report to the punishment hall. I have no patience left to deal with your failures personally." The necromancers nodded, bowing deeply. As the Tower Master commands, they mumbled in unison, their voices trembling with the weight of their impending fate. As the Tower Master turned to leave, he paused, glancing over his shoulder at the skeletal figure that now followed him obediently. "You," he said, pointing at the undead. "What was your name?" Sebas hesitated, but then spoke up hesitantly. "It was Ludwig, Tower Master." "Ludwig," the Tower Master repeated, rolling the name on his tongue as though tasting it. "A decent enough name for a skeleton. Better than something common like Dave, I suppose. Come, Ludwig. You have much to learn." And with that, the Tower Master strode out of the temple, his newest thrall in tow. Ludwig's skeletal form followed silently, a spectre of a lost hero bound to serve a master who viewed him as little more than a curiosity, his dreams and destiny reduced to ash in the wake of dark magic. But deep within those hollow eye sockets, beyond the faint flicker of blue light, something stirred, something that neither the necromancers nor the Tower Master could perceive. A spark of defiance, perhaps. A sliver of hope. Or maybe, just maybe, the first flickering ember of a soul that refused to be extinguished. Chapter 5 Plot Twist. Now, in stories and epics, the hero is usually presented with a dilemma, a hard choice, or a trial so that his journey would begin. That is what makes a story, the challenges and trials that would guide our hero to the end, good or bad, happy or sad, or even incomplete in cases. However, that requires a plot, a hero, and a twist. Here, Ludwig would receive his twist, and he would use it incredibly well. Let's go back a few hours from now, and see what happened from the side of Ludwig. ******. The two necromancers had been scribbling and writing away at Ludwig's massacred body, while he, in a strange occurrence of what could be called magical, or mystical, was able to see what went on. Perhaps a ghost form? A spirit form, he didn't know, but he was aware of his presence. A notification had appeared in front of him, several of them in fact. The first one, a clear declaration of his fate. You died. It was plain and simple, and gave him closure. He looked at this blue, almost transparent screen and could only open and close his non-existent mouth. After all, the trials of a hero, the hopes of the people, and the challenges against the vile and evil and the eventual revelation of the entire kingdom were nothing but fading dreams that died far too short. What a shit plot, Ludwig thought. It was the first time he would ever mutter a curse word. And it felt liberating. Although too late, because the ultimate liberator was death itself. Now he could say whatever he wanted, whenever he wanted. After all, who is there left to judge him? The thoughts immediately were suspended as he saw the next window. You have failed the eternal quest, quest of a hero. You have failed the eternal quest, the liberator. You have failed the eternal quest, defeating evil. You may rest for now. Your duty has ended. It was that simple, a declaration of his detachment of his duties toward the people of Echos. After all, in the many stories he had read, a few of them had heroes that died shortly after being summoned, but in those stories, the heroes themselves weren't the main characters. And the real heroes were those in the shadows that would take on the mantle afterward. Yet, no such thing was going to happen to Ludwig. It was instinctive. His death was too plain, too boring, and too pointless. As he watched the necromancers, they began chanting some weird and strange words, a ritual of sorts. And the moment he heard them chanting the final words did he realize what they were doing. They wanted to bring back his body as an undead. And just as they finished, his presence, or soul or whatever it was, got sucked back into the corpse. Soon, he felt the aura of two powerful entities fighting on top of his corpse as he struggled to gain any semblance of control over his body. While the two auras were fighting among each other, in his mind he heard something. Don't move a bone. It felt like an eternal command. Something far too deep and primal within Ludwig made him follow that command instinctively. He didn't know who uttered it, but he knew one thing. Whoever did, was so mighty that the mere thought of going against them would probably cause his entire existence to vanish. And so did Ludwig. He didn't move a bone after he stood up. He was aware of his surrounding, aware of the people next to him. He was alive? No, far from it. He was neither dead nor alive. But in between, an undead. A notification appeared in front of him. You have been blessed by Necro, the god of death. It was a simple text, that harbored a great deal of mystery behind it. Without him uttering a word, his status screen appeared once again in front of him. Status screen: Ludwig Heart. Race: undead. Health: 100/100. Stamina: infinite. Mana: 100/100. Intelligence: 10. Strength: 10. Dexterity: 10. Vigor: 10. Luck: 15. Class: hero. Skeleton grunt. Title: Removed, predestined hero. One who can save the world. Possessed abilities: Removed, heroes starter pack. Passives: Resolve, negate one negative effect on the bearer. Activates once a day. Overt genius, increased proficiency in all sorts of masteries. Removed, heroic spirit. A removed, strong resistance to demonic temptations and mental ailments. Several of his abilities were scratched off, along with his former class of a hero, and the majority of his stats were reduced by third. On the other hand, his stamina was infinite. That is the price of undeath. They never tire after all. While he was occupied with his status screen, the man who would soon be revealed as the Tower Master of the Black Tower would appear. This made Ludwig tense up, because in his blue eyes, he was able to see something far more sinister than the two necromancers that had killed him. An endless canopy of death was following him. Souls of creatures long since gone and long since they have perished were following him closely like ticks on a dog. They wouldn't leave him be and wouldn't move away. They would scream an echoless and voiceless screech of misery and pain. A pained lullaby only the dead can hear. The sounds of thousands of murdered souls. Souls pulled away from their eternal rest and forced into servitude under the same person who had corrupted them. The man spoke with a tongue more vicious than that of a serpent, lashing out with words that sounded far crueler than the mightiest of whips, though he spoke not once out of decorum. The two necromancers had felt that their end was nigh, and Ludwig thought that they would soon come and join the endless souls attached to that man. The man would then proceed by raising his arm, manifesting something that Ludwig had never seen before. Well, he did see a portion of it as he was being tested on, but now, with his new ethereal blue eyes, he was able to see it clearly. A powerful surge of a liquid-like energy that stemmed from the man's heart and channeled through his body, assisted by the world outside. A manifestation of power that couldn't be described, slowly at times and rapidly at times, coiling around his entire body, and almost in an instant manifested into a ball of black flames. It was an incredible thing to behold, and thanks to his new eyes he was able to see it clearly. It was like a mathematical formula? That was the closest thing Ludwig's mind could think of. After all, he never saw something like this before. It was a change in friction, a transfer of heat and cold, all subjugated to a precise force that acted and moved at a specific speed and velocity to create something like this. As if mesmerized by the spell, without him even realizing, he too had begun the same process of channeling this same energy unbeknownst to even his awareness, through his body. Yet, the quality was on a completely different level. If the Tower Master's energy was comparable to a sun, then the energy that Ludwig had in him was no bigger than a firefly. The energy failed to achieve the minimum required, in terms of understanding, experience, and knowledge, not to mention mana. The application immediately died, sputtering a small puff of smoke. Only then did Ludwig realize what happened, and he was unintentionally mimicking the Tower Master. This fact caught him by surprise and almost made him want to hide under the ground. Yet he remembered well the words of the voice which asked him to not move a muscle, or bone in this case. Attack him, the voice once again ordered, and he immediately followed and was suddenly grabbed. The Tower Master displayed interest and soon slammed his hand on Ludwig's skull. You are being subjugated. The caster is far stronger than you are. You cannot resist. Just as that window appeared in front of Ludwig, another soon appeared in front of him. Resolve has activated. Resolve. Negate one negative effect on the user. Resolve had entered cooldown. Let me assist you with that. Another time the voice spoke. Necro's blessing has activated. Your enslavement will not take effect unless you are in the presence of the Tower Master Bostos van Dijk. Fakery of death. As long as Bostos van Dijk's interest in you rises, you shall be warned and be aware of him. Once he is away from sight, you'll regain your full freedom. You cannot remove yourself from Bostos van Dijk unless specified by the caster himself. You cannot try and escape from him, or it will break the fakery of death and reveal that your will is intact and no longer bound to him. Necros' eternal quest. Deus Necros, the Lord of Death, has found in you what could be called in the mortal tongue, interest. As one who is considered a neutral force that belongs to neither good nor evil, Necros finds himself to never be in need of a champion. You are no exception. Yet the interest you have brought to Necro was enough to make the ancient silence watch you closely. You are now given an eternal quest. First part, outgrow Bostos van Dijk's control. Difficulty level. Skull and crossbones, skull and crossbones, skull and crossbones, skull and crossbones, skull and crossbones 1. Ludwig's story, which sounded like it had ended abruptly, has fortunately, or maybe, unfortunately, succumbed to the trials and tribulations of fate. Ludwig's story as a hero of light has taken a different twist and turn. After all, what is a story without a plot twist? Chapter 6 First Mistake. Follow. A command has been given. Ludwig's skeletal body moved with a mind of its own, each step deliberate yet devoid of the fluid grace that living beings possess. His bones clinked and jittered with every motion, the eerie symphony echoing through the silent corridors as he trailed behind the dark tower master. The mage's presence was palpable, an oppressive aura that weighed heavily on Ludwig's very essence. It was a darkness that transcended mere description, a palpable force that could only be felt deep within the soul. The souls of the damned whispered incessantly around them, their voices a haunting blend of torment and despair. Some cursed at the dark mage, their ethereal forms writhing in silent agony, while others wept tears of sorrow that never fell. A thick canopy of death enveloped the man, intensifying Ludwig's fear and unease. The air was thick with the scent of decay and unspoken dread, each step forward a reminder of the peril he was entangled in. The system, or rather the quest-giver, showed no concern for Ludwig's desires or fears. It had bestowed upon him an eternal quest, an unyielding mission to outgrow Bostos van Dijk's formidable control. Ludwig knew, with a sinking certainty, that this task was nearly impossible. Bostos van Dijk was a master of necromancy, a sorcerer whose command over the dead was absolute and terrifying. The very notion of defying such power seemed to border on the miraculous. Deep within his spirit, Ludwig recognized the grim reality. He was ensnared by a force far too mighty and fearsome to challenge. His intellect, though sharp, felt inadequate against the overwhelming darkness that held him captive. Yet, bound by the unbreakable chains of his quest, he had no choice but to comply. So, Ludwig followed. They navigated the labyrinthine passages of the temple with methodical precision. The corridors twisted and turned, each corner revealing another stretch of ominous stone and shadow. The man walked with a slow, steady pace, his presence commanding silence and obedience. Ludwig's skeletal footsteps were the only sounds that broke the oppressive stillness, the clinking of his bones resonating through the echoing chambers. After what felt like an eternity of endless lefts and rights, they arrived at a vast, empty room. In the center stood a rip in space, a jagged tear that seemed to defy the very laws of reality. Through the rift, Ludwig could glimpse the outlines of another realm, a swirling vortex of colors and light that beckoned with an otherworldly allure. The Dark Tower Master, fully clad in black, took a confident step into the rift. His form shimmered and distorted as he vanished into the unknown, leaving Ludwig to process the significance of this portal. Just as quickly as it had appeared, a notification materialized before Ludwig's ethereal vision. The control of Bostos van Dijk has waned. You are free to move as you see fit. The message was cryptic yet enlightening. It indicated that traversing the rift had somehow diminished Bostos van Dijk's grip over him. Moreover, the mage's effortless passage suggested a familiarity or even mastery over such spatial anomalies. Ludwig pondered the implications. If Bostos could manipulate space so effortlessly, the task ahead was not just daunting but seemingly insurmountable. Despite the notification's promise of newfound freedom, Ludwig understood the precariousness of his situation. He knew he had to follow the mage through the rift, lest his partial liberation be exposed. Any hint of his semi-autonomous existence could spell disaster, exposing vulnerabilities that Bostos van Dijk could exploit. With a deep, unspoken resolve, Ludwig stepped into the rift. The transition was instantaneous, the world around him warping and shifting until he found himself in an entirely different location. He shook off the initial confusion. Magic was beyond his understanding, yet the pressing need to follow took precedence over all else. The bind with Bostos van Dijk has been re-established. Ludwig's surroundings transformed into a grand study, its vastness accentuated by towering bookshelves filled with ancient tomes and arcane artifacts. The window beside him offered a panoramic view of the sprawling city below. Where few huts and houses were built sporadically everywhere, the whole area looked grim and mostly devastated. A quite thematic view that fit perfectly with the Dark Tower Master, while the whole view conveyed one more thing. The place they were in was incredibly high. Compared to the modest abodes scattered around, the building itself stood as a testament to dark grandeur and architectural prowess. The dark mage resumed his stride, waving a hand dismissively, and that caused the entire rift to close in a second, disappearing as if it was never there in the first place. Let those two walk back all the way here. This should at least teach them a lesson, or death. His clap echoed through the room, a grim proclamation of his twisted sense of justice. Without missing a beat, he adjusted his glasses and fixed his penetrating gaze on Ludwig. Now, what shall we do with you? Bostos van Dijk inquired, tilting his head thoughtfully as he rested his chin on one hand, the other arm crossed over the other. His demeanor was one of calculated authority, a master contemplating the next move in his dark game. Ludwig stood frozen, gratitude mingling with fear for the mysterious force that prevented him from acting without explicit commands in Bostos van Dijk's presence. Otherwise, his rational mind would have been in turmoil, grappling with the sheer terror of his predicament. Let's see now, unravel memories, the mage declared. As the words left Bostos van Dijk's lips, his hands swiftly moved to Ludwig's skull, fingers brushing against the hollow sockets. A new notification flashed before Ludwig's eyes. Your memory is being read. You cannot resist. Necro's blessing had interfered. Bostos van Dijk's lips curled into a sinister smile, reminiscent of the one Ludwig had seen when the mage obliterated the two necromancers. A chill ran down Ludwig's spine. Would the same fate befall him? The interference of Necro's blessing provided a sliver of hope, yet Ludwig was uncertain of its true effect. Did it fully conceal his memories, or only obscure them partially? The possibility that the Tower Master might be aware of his transmigration weighed heavily on his mind. In every tale he had ever read, such secrets were sacrosanct, guarded fiercely and never to be revealed. Damn those two fools! Bostos van Dijk spat through gritted teeth, forcefully withdrawing his hand from Ludwig's skull. They did such a terrible job bringing you back that they ruined your mind. You're nothing but an empty, mindless husk that cannot act without being told what to do. What am I to do with you? Send you to the dungeon? Perhaps? At least you'd serve a purpose. Maybe use you as a training dummy for novice black mags. Ah, what a waste. To squander the soul of a summoned hero this way. It breaks my heart, he lamented, letting out a heavy sigh as he sank into his ornate chair. Bostos van Dijk's desk was a sprawling expanse cluttered with endless stacks of papers and research notes, many written in a cryptic language that the system failed to translate for Ludwig. The mage's eyes remained fixed on Ludwig's lifeless form, deep in contemplation about how to utilize this failed experiment. Clean up this place, Van Dijk commanded abruptly. Ludwig, accustomed to a life of opulence and ease within the gilded confines of his former existence, found himself thrust into menial labor. Despite never having performed such tasks before, his spirit's innate discipline took over. He moved gracefully, beginning to gather the scattered papers, his skeletal fingers deftly collecting them into neat piles before disposing of them in the bin. Grabbing a dirty rag from the cluttered desk, he dipped it into a jar containing a pair of rotted eyes, likely remnants of one of Bostos van Dijk's dark experiments. The decayed eyes stared blankly, a macabre reminder of the mage's twisted pursuits. With meticulous care, Ludwig began wiping the stains and tidying the study, his actions precise and methodical despite his undead state. The black mage observed with a growing sense of intrigue, a light grin creeping onto his lips. You're a strange fellow. Usually, skeletons would never understand a direct command such as clean up the place. How come you understood it? Is it possible, or within the realm of possibility, that you still retain sentience after death? The mage's questions were laden with suspicion, each word probing deeper into the mystery of Ludwig's existence. Ludwig could feel the figurative sweat pooling beneath his ribcage, a sensation he couldn't entirely comprehend. After all, the command clean up the place was straightforward, something no mere skeleton would be capable of understanding beyond its literal interpretation. Skeletons were meant to be mindless servants, executing simple commands like follow, attack, or defend without question. Yet, here stood Ludwig, demonstrating a level of intelligence and autonomy that defied Bostos van Dijk's expectations. This deviation from the norm was precisely what made Ludwig a problematic asset. The Tower Master's mind raced, calculating the implications of this anomaly. Had the necromancers truly failed so spectacularly, or was there something more at play? Ludwig had only just begun his journey, yet he had already committed his first significant error, displaying intelligence beyond his supposed capabilities. This revelation could jeopardize his very existence, exposing the depths of his sentience and the hidden threads of Necro's blessing woven into his very being. As Ludwig continued his futile attempts to tidy the room, he couldn't shake the realization that his presence here was far more complex and perilous than he had initially comprehended. The balance between his constrained obedience and the flickers of autonomy presented a delicate dance, one that could determine his fate in the hands of Bostos van Dijk. Chapter 7: A Brush with Power. Stop what you're doing, Van Dijk's voice commanded. Ludwig's skeletal frame immediately froze. His body, now a slave to the Dark Mage's orders, was locked in place. He couldn't move, couldn't act, except as dictated by the sorcerer's whims. "I'm sure I scanned your mind," Van Dijk muttered, his voice low and thoughtful as he circled Ludwig. "You're impossibly empty of thought and sentience." The Dark Mage seemed to be talking more to himself than to Ludwig as he continued pacing around the skeleton. His gloved hand rested under his chin, his eyes narrowing as though trying to solve some unseen puzzle. "You see, for most undead, it's hard to give them complex or meaningful orders before they reach a certain level of evolution," Van Dijk continued. "For you, though, you're at the very bottom of the chain. A skeleton grunt. Not a warrior, not an archer, not even one of the rare skeleton mags. You are the lowest of the low, something that shouldn't even be considered a true soldier. You're nothing but a brittle test subject, barely fit for anything." He tapped Ludwig's bleached bones, as if to emphasize how fragile the skeleton truly was. "And yet," Van Dijk mused, "with each evolution, an undead grows. Through battle, through endless killing, they evolve, gaining intelligence, strength, and eventually, autonomy. A skeleton swordsman might become elite, and further beyond that, they could earn a name. Rarer still are those who ascend to become Death Knights. I've only witnessed such a transformation once or twice in my entire 600-year existence." Van Dijk's gaze turned sharper, more curious. "But you're showing signs far beyond what should be possible. Traits akin to a Death Knight's intelligence, and yet you're barely at the first level. You've yet to make your first kill, haven't even honed any of your abilities, and still, you follow my orders with a level of precision no grunt should possess." Ludwig's non-existent heart, or what might have been his spirit, pulsed with a sense of alarm. The more Van Dijk studied him, the more his curiosity turned dangerous. As the Dark Mage completed his fourth circle around Ludwig, his words carried an edge of frustration. "What bothers me most isn't your ability to understand me. It's those two fools who botched your resurrection. They think themselves capable dark mags, but they ruined you before you could even develop into something of value. If they had waited, allowed you to grow as a hero, and then killed you, you might have become an elite. A Death Knight, even. But now? Look at you. Just a walking pile of bones who can barely clean a room." The words were casual, dismissive, but they carried a threat that chilled Ludwig's soul. Van Dijk saw him as nothing more than a failed experiment, a wasted opportunity. And Ludwig knew too well how people like the Tower Master treated their failures. He wasn't valuable. He wasn't needed. The thought of being discarded, or worse, loomed over him like a dark cloud. But Van Dijk wasn't finished. His eyes glittered with malice, but also intrigue. "It didn't escape my notice," Van Dijk said, his voice dropping to a dangerous murmur. "You tried to mimic my spell earlier." Ludwig's mind raced. He had thought he was subtle, that his attempt to replicate the Dark Mage's magic had gone unnoticed, but clearly, nothing escaped the Tower Master's gaze. His spirit trembled as though a phantom heartbeat had suddenly thudded in his chest. "And it intrigues me," Van Dijk continued, his gaze locking onto Ludwig's empty sockets. "Don't dodge." The Tower Master's hand moved, and in an instant, the same black flame he had conjured before flickered to life. It swirled with deadly energy, hungry and wild. This time, the power behind it was palpable, raw and violent. "You are in a hostile environment. The power of the incoming spell will destroy you and send you to eternal rest. You cannot move." Ludwig's entire being froze in terror. He wanted to move, wanted to dodge, but the binding magic that held him in thrall wouldn't allow it. He was a slave to Van Dijk's command, forced to stand there and watch as the deadly magic arced toward his temple. The black flames whistled through the air, knocking over several books as they cut a blazing path toward Ludwig's skull. And then, it stopped. The deadly flames halted just millimeters away from Ludwig's bone, close enough that he could feel their heat, but still. Van Dijk's smirk widened as he observed his captive. "You truly are subservient," Van Dijk said, withdrawing his hand. "I had a thought, just for a moment, that you weren't completely under my control. But I see now that I was mistaken." The tension in the room didn't ease. If anything, it thickened as Van Dijk drew closer once again, holding the flickering black flame in front of Ludwig's face. "Do you know what this is?" Van Dijk asked, his voice silky and taunting. "This is Dark Flame, one of my most prized creations. It's a flame that consumes not just the physical but the very essence of its target. But if that were all, I wouldn't be called Tower Master, would I?" He reduced the flame to a mere wisp, barely visible but still pulsing with the same malevolent energy. "This spell uses both mana and demonic energy, something I had to sacrifice my soul for in order to wield. You, however, as an undead, already possess some degree of demonic energy. It taints your very existence. You could, in theory, learn to use this magic, to cast curses, hexes, and debilitating spells that weaken your enemies. Dark magicians like myself don't rely on raw power. We rely on the ability to exhaust and weaken our enemies so that we can tear them apart piece by piece with the most basic of spells afterward. Why fight the strong when you can kill the weak?" Van Dijk's tone shifted, becoming more instructive. He seemed to enjoy explaining the nuances of dark magic, perhaps because he rarely had an audience intelligent enough to comprehend it. "And now, he continued. "I want to see what you're capable of. Replicate this wisp." A command. Ludwig had no choice but to obey. Raising his finger, Ludwig felt the mana within him stir. It was strange, alien, and yet somehow familiar. It flowed through him as if it had always been there, waiting to be used. But Ludwig had never been a mage, never been taught how to wield magic. This was the first time he had ever attempted to harness mana, and yet it felt natural. The mana gathered at the tip of his bony finger, coalescing into a faint, glowing wisp. For a split second, Ludwig felt a surge of exhilaration. He had done it. He had channeled magic. He had control. But just as quickly as the wisp had formed, it sputtered and died, evaporating into nothingness. To Ludwig, that brief moment of magic felt like triumph. To Van Dijk, it was a disappointment. Pathetic, Van Dijk sighed, his eyes narrowing. "You managed to flicker, but you have no idea what you're doing. Your body only followed the order, not your will. That confirms it. You're nothing but a puppet, capable of only the most basic tasks. I had hoped there might be more to you, but it seems you're no better than the rest. A waste of a summoned hero's soul." He turned his back on Ludwig, walking toward the exit of the study. His movements were languid, confident. He had decided Ludwig was no longer worth his time. Stopping near a coat hanger, Van Dijk pulled a long, flowing coat over his shoulders before glancing back at Ludwig one last time. "Continue cleaning the room," he ordered. With that, he stepped out of the study, slamming the heavy door behind him. Ludwig remained motionless for a few moments, the weight of Van Dijk's words sinking in. He was alone again. Truly alone. And free. At least, for the moment. A sigh of relief escaped him. Figurative, of course. His bones creaked as he allowed the tension to drain away. The dark mage had left, and though Ludwig was still bound to him, those brief moments of freedom, no matter how finite, were everything. He was still here, still existing, still thinking. And as long as he could think, there was hope. Chapter 8 Bookworm. Ludwig surveyed the room, trying to find any possible means of escape. His mind raced, aware that the system had given him an impossible task: outgrow Van Dijk's control. Yet, the overwhelming presence of the Tower Master lingered in his thoughts, a constant reminder of the impossible odds stacked against him. There was no way he could break free without being noticed, not with the omnipresent power Bostos wielded. The conversation with Van Dijk had revealed a sliver of hope, however small. Ludwig could evolve. Though he was nothing now, less than a skeleton grunt, he could grow. He could become a Death Knight, a force worthy of battle. But even then, would it be enough? A Death Knight might have the strength to defeat the two necromancers who had resurrected him. But Van Dijk? Even if Ludwig ascended to the highest form of undeath, he doubted it would be enough to bring down the Tower Master. Ludwig's thoughts drifted to another possibility. In all the games he played and stories he read, killing enemies was the key to leveling up, to gaining power. If the same rules applied here, killing would help him evolve. That was his path: gain strength through battle, hone his abilities, and eventually, escape. But as his mind churned through these thoughts, a more grim realization settled in. So what? Ludwig muttered aloud, his hollow voice echoing faintly in the room. The sound of his own voice startled him, and he instinctively slapped his bony hands over his non-existent mouth, causing a dull ache in his jawbone. -1 HP. He had spoken. As a skeleton. That should have been impossible, given his lack of vocal cords or any biological means to produce sound. And worse still, Van Dijk might have heard him. Ludwig froze, every moment stretching into an eternity as he waited for some unseen punishment or retribution. But after a few agonizing seconds, nothing happened. The Tower Master was either far away or not monitoring him as closely as Ludwig feared. Breathing a sigh of relief, he allowed his thoughts to resume their bleak course. What was the point in all of this? Sure, evolving into some powerful undead being sounded appealing. But in the end, he was still an undead. Something neither living nor dead, despised by both the living and the monsters of the world. He was an abomination, condemned to wander without purpose. The thought made Ludwig shudder. He wasn't just seeking strength, he was seeking life. He needed to become human again. That had to be possible. This was a world of magic, after all, and in every story, there was always an elixir of life, some magical cure that could bring the dead back to life. That had to be out there for him, right? The answer was in this world. He just had to find it. But where would he even begin? The answer hit him like a bolt of lightning. He was surrounded by books, endless shelves filled with arcane knowledge. The Tower Master's study was a treasure trove of magical information, perhaps even containing the secrets he needed. He could start here. Ludwig approached one of the bookshelves, his bony fingers trailing over the spines of the ancient tomes. He grabbed the first book that caught his attention. A searing pain ripped through his skull the moment he touched it. He winced, his mind reeling from the sudden mental assault as a notification appeared in front of him. Sigmund Tulk. Understanding of Chimera Art. Your intelligence level is far below the required threshold to read this book. Your linguistic level is too low to comprehend this text. Ludwig groaned in frustration. The book was far too advanced for him to even begin understanding. But he couldn't give up. Desperation gnawed at him as he reached for another book. The same pain struck him again, nearly knocking him off balance. This was going to be more difficult than he thought. It seemed every book in this study was well beyond his current understanding. If he wanted to read and learn from them, he'd need to increase his intelligence or find something more basic. But this was the study of a tower master. The likelihood of finding beginner-level magic books here was slim to none. With a sigh, Ludwig turned away from the books. His gaze drifted toward the door, the only visible exit. He hesitated for a moment, then walked toward it. Maybe, just maybe, the door would be unlocked, and he could sneak out. Before his hand could touch the handle, a blinding magical circle flared to life in front of him, its intricate runes glowing menacingly. The study is currently locked by Bostos van Dijk. If you attempt to brute force the lock, you will perish. Ludwig stepped back in defeat. Of course, the door was locked. He was trapped in this room, bound by Van Dijk's magic. He sighed again, feeling the weight of his situation more acutely than ever. There was no escape, no easy way out. His only option now was to bide his time, to grow stronger, and hope that one day he could break free from this nightmare. Time passed slowly as Ludwig resumed his task of cleaning. His mind churned with unanswered questions and a growing sense of frustration. He had no clear path forward, no mentor, no powerful weapon, no secret ability waiting to be unlocked. Just a broom and an endless list of menial tasks. As he pondered his situation, the door to the study creaked open. Ludwig stiffened, fearing the return of Bostos van Dijk. He quickly dropped the book he had been holding and resumed sweeping the floor, trying to look as inconspicuous as possible. Master Bostos? A familiar voice called from behind him. Ludwig turned slowly to see none other than Sebas, the necromancer who had been responsible for his death. Fear gripped him for a moment. What if they had come back to finish what they started? But Sebas wasn't alone. The other necromancer, Evan, followed behind him, both wearing expressions of irritation. Ludwig's instinct was to flee, but he knew better than to act on that impulse. He froze, gripping the broom tightly. "Oh, guess he's not here," Sebas muttered, scanning the room. "Evan, come on in." The two necromancers entered the study without paying much attention to Ludwig. They moved about the room, oblivious to his presence as they searched for something. Ludwig's confusion grew. Why are they here? He thought. Weren't they supposed to be going to the punishment hall? Time had passed, and by Ludwig's estimation, they had been gone for hours. Surely, they should have been farther away from the tower by now. Is he not here? Evan asked, glancing nervously toward the door. I guess not. He's probably at the academy, doing whatever it is dark mags do, Sebas replied dismissively. Let's just put the stuff back and leave before we get caught. Ludwig watched as they retrieved the black book, the one they had used to revive him. Alongside it, they placed several jars filled with his organs, or what remained of them, on the desk. The sight of his own mutilated body parts made Ludwig shudder, but he kept quiet. Sebas threw Ludwig a disdainful glance as he placed the book back on the desk. Move, he snarled, delivering a vicious kick to Ludwig's back. -6 HP. The blow sent Ludwig sprawling to the floor, his bones rattling as he hit the cold stone. A notification appeared. You are in a hostile environment. Stupid thing, Sebas muttered. It caused us so many problems, and it wasn't even brought back properly. Evan pulled Sebas aside before he could kick Ludwig again. Don't break him, you idiot. If the Tower Master still needs him and you damage him, our punishment will be worse than death. We could end up as his next experiments. Sebas grumbled but relented, backing away from Ludwig with a sneer. Fine, fine. But if it were up to me, I'd smash this useless pile of bones to dust. The two necromancers quickly left, shutting the door behind them and locking Ludwig back inside the study. Ludwig let out another sigh, frustration bubbling up inside him. This isn't how it was supposed to be, he thought. In the stories, the protagonist always started with some overpowered ability, a mentor to guide them, or a legendary weapon that set them apart. But Ludwig had none of that. He was dead, a skeleton in enemy territory with no advantages, no hidden powers, and no way out. Despair gnawed at him, and for a moment, he considered throwing himself out the window. Perhaps the fall would shatter his bones and end his miserable existence once and for all. But as he looked out at the towering height, he knew it was futile. His body would likely survive the impact, and even if it didn't, what would it change? He'd still be trapped in this nightmare. As Ludwig wrestled with his dark thoughts, something caught his eye. A small, old book wedged under a stool. It had been placed there to balance the uneven legs of a chair. The book was worn and dusty, its cover barely legible. Curiosity piqued. Ludwig bent down and picked up the book. The moment he touched it, his mind throbbed with the familiar pain of an advanced text. But he pushed through it, intrigued by the title. Deus Necros, Death and Necromancy. The Forbidden Arts. By Unknown. Chapter 9, The Weight of Knowledge. The book felt unnaturally heavy in Ludwig's skeletal hands as he opened the first page. Each word seemed to pierce his mind, each sentence a thorny knot that tightened with every attempt to untangle it. The pain grew more intense the longer he read, as if the very text was rejecting his attempt to understand it, a defense mechanism meant to guard secrets beyond his comprehension. Deus Necros, a god perhaps? Or maybe something beyond. An entity that rules over death and the undead. A neutral entity that seeks no control or power, nor does it have a champion. Void of all emotions, it works in mystery as it oversees the laws of death and protects them jealously from the interference of other gods. Those of the light path wished to bring back those who were once hailed as heroes and lost their lives in battle, and those of the dark path wished to bring back those of most heinous of acts. Deeds and feats simple to invoke for entities that can define reality as we know it. Yet Deus Necros never agreed to the return of any of them back to life. He guarded their souls jealously, and only those that ever came back, they returned in the form of undeath. The title, Deus Necros, suggested a deity or perhaps something even greater. An entity that governed over death and the undead. According to the text, this entity operated beyond the realm of mortal understanding, overseeing the laws of death and safeguarding them against interference from other gods. Ghouls, vampires, banshees, ghosts and more, not among the living, and never among the dead. To forever walk the realm never finding peace due to having disrespected Deus Necros' eternal law of death. To die is to rest. To defy that is to forever roam without ever seeing rest. And it is a law carved in every living being. For how the undead came to be, it is a secret that Deus Necros has kept for a long time, until we dark mags managed to figure out bits and pieces of such a secret. Necromancy, the art of raising the dead, a feat that cannot simply be called miraculous but rather divine. And at the same time, an extremely delicate and difficult art to master but quite easy to begin learning. We necromancers should never consider that it is us who bring back the dead. We only open the path for them to return, but it is only by the grace of Deus Necros that they are allowed to return. And you as a catalyst must always bear it in mind. You are but a tool and he is the source. Ludwig's mind reeled as he continued reading. The more he understood, the more painful the process became. Each line felt like a hot iron brand against his consciousness, a warning that this knowledge was not meant for him. As for our lesson, let's start with raising a rat. Ludwig's mind was on the verge of splitting apart when he finally noticed something. The room was no longer empty. He turned, his movements slow and strained, to see Bostos van Dijk standing behind him, a sinister gleam in his eyes. Interesting. Quite interesting. Van Dijk's voice was like a dagger of ice stabbing through Ludwig's bones. The dark mage's face was lit with a perverse excitement, his eyes wide with a kind of manic glee. Ludwig was too stunned to respond. If he had been capable of sweating, he would have been drenched. The fact that he had been caught reading something so potentially forbidden made his non-existent heart quiver in terror. Or simply the act of reading was enough to entice Van Dijk to almost ecstasy. The fact that your head is steaming means you're struggling to comprehend what's in front of you, Van Dijk said, his tone a mixture of amusement and fascination. Not only was I wrong about you lacking sentience, but you actually show intelligence. Enough to read and even learn from the text at hand. He approached Ludwig, his gaze never leaving the skeleton. You see, he began, almost as if lecturing, only high-level undead possess the intellect necessary to understand magic. A lich, for example, must either be created by a mightier force, an archlich or an extraordinarily powerful necromancer, or must be a former human with enough magical knowledge to willingly turn to undeath. Vampires retain their memories and intellect upon turning, and Death Knights are already imbued with immense power and intelligence. But you're just a skeleton. You shouldn't have sentience, let alone the capacity to read and understand complex texts. So why? Why do you read? I scanned your mind, and it was empty. I searched your memories, and there was nothing. Yet here you are, learning. Quite the discovery. Ludwig slowly placed the book down, unsure of how to respond or even if he was allowed to. His mind was racing, trying to process what Van Dijk had said and what it meant for him. Continue. Van Dijk's sudden shout made Ludwig's bones rattle. You have been given a direct command. Ludwig's hands moved against his will, picking the book back up and resuming his reading. The pain intensified, but he couldn't stop. It was as if Van Dijk's command was forcing the words into his mind, burning them into his very soul. His head began to steam, literal wisps of vapor rising from his skull as the arcane knowledge took its toll. Interesting, Van Dijk mused, observing Ludwig with an almost clinical interest. Your health isn't dropping, and your pain tolerance is only temporary. You won't lose your sanity even if you read the most difficult of books, nor will you fall unconscious. A book of this level would kill a human who tried to read it. But you persist. The curse of undeath, the endless stamina given by Deus Necros to all of his pure undead. If only vampires had that. They'd rule the world, but they already possess so much strength that Deus Necros denied them the endless stamina of the undead. Ludwig's mind reeled as he read on, the text blurring as he tried to make sense of its meaning. The book spoke of necromancy in intricate detail, of the various forms of undead and their capabilities, of the delicate balance between life, death, and undeath. It was knowledge far beyond his current level, but he absorbed it, piece by painful piece. Now, Van Dijk muttered, almost to himself, should I dissect you? Perhaps I'll find out more. The words sent a jolt of fear through Ludwig. He could almost feel the icy fingers of death gripping his spine, the cold metal of surgical tools hovering over him, ready to tear him apart. But then, the mage sighed, his excitement giving way to resignation. No, it would be a waste. I'd be no different from those two fools who brought you back improperly. Speaking of which, they've returned. Van Dijk grabbed the black necromancy book that the necromancers had left behind, placing it on a shelf with a dismissive gesture. He then pulled up a chair, setting it in front of Ludwig as he continued to read. Hold on. You have been given a direct command. Ludwig stopped reading, raising his head to look at Van Dijk. If you can read, Van Dijk began, his eyes gleaming with a disturbing light, then you can understand. And if you can understand, then speak. You have been given a direct command. Under the blessing of Deus Necros, some of your words will be altered. Yes. The words slipped from Ludwig's mouth, his voice low and hollow. It was his voice, but it wasn't. It sounded foreign, detached from him. Van Dijk's eyes widened in manic delight. It speaks, he exclaimed, nearly knocking his chair over as he stood. Tell me, who are you? What are you? Where do you come from? You have been given a direct command. Under the blessing of Deus Necros, some of your words will be altered. Ludwig tried to resist, but his mouth moved on its own, forming words against his will. I am Ludwig. I am a skeleton. I do not remember. Van Dijk scrutinized him closely, his eyes narrowing as he processed the words. Interesting. This still fits with your lack of memory. I guess you're simply a mutated type. Something new. Oh, how I wish I could open that skull of yours, but you're too precious to waste. Tell me, what have you learned so far from that book? Ludwig hesitated, his mind racing for an answer that wouldn't give away too much. But the compulsion to speak was too strong. How to raise a rat, he said simply. Van Dijk raised an eyebrow. You know how, but can you do it? Ludwig shook his head. Too low mana. He raised a finger, channeling what little mana he had. It gathered at the tip of his finger, flickering briefly before sputtering out like a dying candle flame. Ow! What a waste! Van Dijk roared in frustration. Those blundering fools. If they needed to bring you back, they should have tried to make you a Drager at least. Why a skeleton? A Drager still has internal organs, a heart even. I could have grafted a mana circle into it. Damn those idiots. The more I think about it, the more I want to rip out their livers and eat them in front of them. Van Dijk's aura flared wildly, the air around him growing heavy with a palpable, malevolent force. Even the spirits that clung to him seemed to recoil, too terrified to approach him as his rage boiled over. But just as quickly as his fury had erupted, it subsided. The dark mage sighed, adjusting his glasses with a cold, calculating calm. Fine. It'll be a hassle, but I can still fix it. Regardless, magic without knowledge is useless. And everything here, he gestured around the room, is completely beyond your scope. Let's start with the basics. Yes, I'll be your teacher. My first ever direct pupil. His smile stretched unnaturally, a grin that spoke of madness more than joy. And in that smile, Ludwig saw his own impending doom. Terror gripped Ludwig's soul, his non-existent heart filled with a dread that surpassed any fear he had felt before. Chapter 10 Cramming. First things first. You need knowledge, so far you're dumber than a brick, Van Dijk said with a dismissive wave of his hand, his eyes boring into Ludwig's empty sockets. Yes, Ludwig responded mechanically, the words slipping out before he had a chance to think. It's yes, master. Van Dijk snapped, flicking Ludwig's forehead with a sharp crack. -1 HP. Yes, master, Ludwig replied, forcing the words through a veil of resentment. He had been called young master countless times in his previous life, a title of respect from the maids and servants back home. Now, the tables had turned. He was the servant, the underling. Though humiliating, it wasn't hard to adjust to this new role, at least not outwardly. Good, good, Van Dijk muttered as he scanned the room with a critical eye. Sadly, I don't have anything here that can be considered beginner-friendly, he said, his gaze sweeping over the numerous tomes lining the shelves. Then, as if struck by a sudden thought, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small blue crystal. Sebers, Evan, you bastards, where are you? Van Dijk barked into the crystal. A flickering holographic image of Sebers appeared, the necromancer's eyes wide with fear as he struggled to catch the crystal projection. Why yes, Tower Master. Sebers stammered, his voice trembling. Behind him, Evan's face was visible, looking even more nervous. Bring me all elementary books about magic, Van Dijk ordered curtly. What for? Sebers dared to ask, genuine confusion in his tone. The Tower Master had no use for elementary texts, so the request seemed baffling. Evan, realizing the folly of questioning their master, immediately elbowed Sebers in the ribs. We'll do so right now. What range? White magic? Red? Or black? Elementary for now. Elemental magic can wait. Just bring all you can get your hands on. Hurry, Van Dijk demanded, dismissing them with a wave that shut down the crystal projection. Let's wait for those two fools now. But tell me, what are your current abilities? Van Dijk asked, his gaze returning to Ludwig with a mixture of curiosity and impatience. I have none, Ludwig replied. Strange, everyone should have at least one or two right after their birth. Inspect, Van Dijk muttered, extending his palm toward Ludwig. Nothing happened on Van Dijk's end, but on Ludwig's side, an entirely different scene unfolded. Congratulations, you have seen how Inspect works. You can now use it to inspect the world around you, including its people. Inspect, the ability to showcase another's information, including objects and materials. Inspect, Ludwig muttered, almost involuntarily. Immediately, a window appeared before him. Bostos Van Dijk. Status screen, Bostos Van Dijk. Level? Health. Stamina. Mana. Intelligence. Strength. Dexterity? Vigor? Luck? Class, Dark Archmage. Title, Black Tower Master. Your level is too low to fully showcase this person's status screen. What did you just do? Van Dijk's voice was sharp, a slight chill in the air as he fixed his gaze on Ludwig. I used inspect, Ludwig replied, trying to sound as detached as possible. That feels awfully violating, Van Dijk said, rubbing his chin in thought. And inspect can only be used on inanimate objects to understand their purpose. You using it on people is unheard of, regardless. Tell me what you saw when you used it. Ludwig relayed the information, watching as Van Dijk's face twisted into a look of horror, disbelief mingled with fascination. What monster are you? Your exploits are a violation of the world itself. Van Dijk muttered, his eyes narrowed in suspicion. Still, it is yours, an ability that only you can use. Don't ever use it on people stronger than you. You know what? Don't use it on people, period. It will cause you more strife than good. Understood, Ludwig said obediently, though his mind was racing with the potential applications of inspect. It was a powerful tool, one that could give him insight into his enemies, or his captors. Not a moment later, there was a knock on the door. Van Dijk waved his hand, and the door creaked open, just enough to reveal Siebes and Evan standing nervously on the other side. The books, Van Dijk commanded, extending his hand without allowing them a full view of the room behind him. Siebes handed over a ring, which Van Dijk examined briefly before nodding. I still need more. Bring me books on history, theology, world maps, and anything considered novice level of education. May I ask why? Siebes asked, curiosity getting the better of him. Evan, realizing the danger in that question, delivered another elbow to Siebes's ribs, prompting a pained grunt. As the Tower Master commands, Evan said quickly, pulling Siebes away. He's lucky to have a friend like Evan, Van Dijk muttered as the door closed. Otherwise, I'd have made him a walking corpse a long time ago. Turning back to Ludwig, Van Dijk tossed the ring toward him. Begin by reading all of these, understand them, and I'll quiz you on them. Can you do it? Ludwig caught the ring, feeling a strange sense of freedom in the question. It wasn't an order, but a request. For the first time, it seemed he had been given a choice. I will try, Ludwig replied, but hesitated. But what? Van Dijk's eyes flashed with irritation, mistaking Ludwig's pause for defiance. I do not know how to open this, Ludwig admitted. Van Dijk's brow furrowed. Open? How did you know that the ring can be opened? The dark mage hadn't mentioned anything about the ring's true nature, yet Ludwig had deduced it was a storage ring. Could it be that Ludwig possessed some latent knowledge of magical artifacts? Or were his memories merely obscured from a mage as powerful as Van Dijk? I used inspect, Ludwig lied. In truth, he had recognized the ring's function from countless stories he had read in his previous life. Ah, figures. Van Dijk sighed, momentarily assuaged. Anyway, put your mana into it, the same way you tried when mimicking my flame. It will reveal its contents to you. Ludwig did as instructed, channeling his mana into the ring. A new window opened before him, showcasing hundreds of books. The sheer volume was staggering, an immense repository of knowledge, now at his fingertips. The only advice I'll give you is to begin reading whatever book you choose. Don't stop if you don't understand something. Keep going until you finish the book, then move on to the next. Once you've read all of them, start again from scratch. All that seemed mysterious will unveil itself to you later on, Van Dijk instructed, shrugging his coat on once more. I'll go and gather some tools to aid you in your progress. After all, finding and guiding a new pupil isn't easy. I'll return tomorrow. I expect you to have read at least 2 books by then. After all, the dead don't need to rest. He said this with a cruel smile, leaving the room and locking the door behind him. Ludwig was left alone, faced with an overwhelming task. Hundreds of books, each one a step toward understanding the world he was trapped in. This would take him months to read, maybe more. Yet, It was his only option. I guess I better start, Ludwig muttered to himself. They say knowledge is power, and right now, it's all I have. He picked up the first book in the pile. Magic Circles, The Correlation of Magic and Body, by Ludwig Heart. Ludwig scanned the first page, and it felt as though his mind was a dry sponge finally being drenched in water. He absorbed the text, each word imprinting itself into his memory. Magic exists all around us. It is what we feel, breathe, eat, and experience. It is the miracle of life and death, the force that animates our world. Every strand of grass, every drop of water, every piece of rock holds within it a tiny spark of magic. While living beings have long overlooked this fundamental truth, believing magic to be the domain of mythical beasts, it was not until the emergence of the first casters that we began to harness and manifest this power in various ways. Ludwig's mind drank in the knowledge like a man dying of thirst. The book described the first uses of magic: to bring rain, to aid in farming, to warm hearths on cold nights. It was a tool of aid, of creation, until humanity discovered its potential for destruction and conquest. Magic evolved, and with it, so did the need to categorize and control it. Thus, we devised a system to grade magic, to comprehend its various forms and potentials. This is where the correlation of magic and the body becomes essential. First things first, magic circles. What are they? How do we create them? And what is their purpose? Chapter 11: The 5 Towers of Magic. Before you read, please be patient with me on this chapter. It may look like info dumping, but we'll need this information later on. I'll also slowly remind the reader of bits and parts of this down the road. For now, these are simply the general outlines of what is to come. Ludwig continued reading until something appeared in front of him. You have gained +1 intelligence. Wait, what? He muttered, completely surprised. I would guess that intelligence does indeed grow with reading, but how does the system even compute that? His question had no ears to fall onto, so he just sighed and resumed his study. What Ludwig Heart talked about was a profound and exhaustive explanation of the circles a magician can have in their hearts. But it also defined how it may only be possible for certain beings to have such a thing like magic circles. For example, creatures of magic, such as dragons and elves and druids and the sort, don't need them. They are part magic, and part whatever they are. As for humans, they all start with a body that is pretty much detached from magic, and need to create the circles to host their magic. A heart can contain up to 9 magic circles, which is already an almost impossible feat to reach, since only 3 people have ever reached that realm. As for the first circle, it is where one is able to use the most basic of spells, such as Fireball, Windblade, Waterball, Earth Spikes, and so on and so forth. The second level will allow the user to cast a higher tier, costing more mana but with more destructive powers, such as Firebomb, Wind Saw, Water Torrent, Earth Grasp, and so on so forth. The levels would increase, and so would the magic and mana cost. As for how one can create a magic circle, it is pretty simple. Once one is able to feel the mana inside them, they'll need to channel it around their hearts, creating a sturdy ring of mana that will constantly spiral around their hearts. Sounds simple at first, but this requires an incredible focus and dedication to the craft, not to mention a diagram to follow. There are several schools of thought that devised several mana circles. First, let's talk about the most common magic circle, the white circle. Born from the research of the scholars of magic, the white circle is the simplest of the bunch, and it requires one to focus up their mana into the shape of a ring around their hearts, while at the same time they'll use their remaining mana to lock it in place and make it a permanent existence in their hearts. To be frank, that is pretty much almost all what other schools do. This is the basic start. As for how, the excess mana would act as a soldering tool to fit and lock the circle in place. It is like creating a new limb that you'll be forever conscious of. Creating the circles is the easiest part, but having the excess mana left over to bind it to remain a permanent part of you is the most difficult part, especially since the bind will be requiring incredibly more cumulative mana each level. If we give the first level, for example, let's say a specific number of 1 mana unit, then the next level would need 10 times the mana unit, while the third level will need 100, and so on so forth. Now one would think, if you already have that much mana in you, why do you even need to make circles? The answer is simple. It is because a human body cannot contain that much mana in the first place. Unlike dragons who are inherently magic at its essence. They don't need such a thing as a mana circle. They are born already capable of using 6th tier level of magic in the first place. And can grow to reach the 8th level and in some rare cases even 9th level magic. While the human body is incapable of hosting so much mana at once, it will simply destroy them. Thus, the creation of magic circles which act as permanent organs for saving mana. You have gained +1 intelligence. Another notification interrupted Ludwig's reading. He was interested in what Algid Hill was saying. The explanation was simple and clear, and seemed to broaden his perspective of this world's power level. Now, for others that don't need such a thing as magic circles, such as sorcerers, who are beings, humans even that are born with an aptitude and a quality to receive mana that is far above that of their brethren and peers. A sorcerer, however, has a great advantage in terms of the magic they can use, since they can be born with at least a level for magic ability and skills, and can further grow 2 or 3 tiers if lucky and talented above. But at the same time, they can never breach the 8th level, not to even think about dreaming of reaching the 9th. Then there are other beings, such as the undead for example. Some vampires, or even liches and banshees are born with a powerful ability to handle mana. The nobles of the vampire race can also build up and create circles, but that will only weaken them as it will further endanger their hearts since it's their weak points. But a mage vampire is at all and any level a step above any other wizard or mage of the same rank simply due to the incredible mana potential they have. Although the downside for normal vampires is they lose half of their ability when it's morning time. As for the nobles of their race, they lose up to a quarter of it. As for undead, liches for example, a rare breed of undead that is able to use death magic, they do not resort to using magic circles since they are well dead, and have no heart to host the magic circle. They save their mana circles inside what they call an eternal flask, which is their weak point, since a lick can forever regenerate and come back unless their eternal flask is destroyed. Liches can use up to 5th tier magic just by existing, and can go up 2 more ranks once they reach an archlick level. There are more creatures with this exemption of circles. Like we mentioned before, the closer you are to the source of magic the less reliant you'll need to use circles to host your mana. For elves they are attuned with nature to such an incredible degree that they can command it and that lives on it to do their bidding. Some of the nobler elves can even use the roots of the world tree Yggdrasil to foil any of their enemies. And they don't even need to have an ounce of magic in them as they use the magic around them, which is a stage no one had ever reached before. You have gained +1 intelligence. Another notification distracted Ludwig, but he continued on. The book had a lengthy but clear explanation of magic, and it helped him understand the purpose of it. Not only that, he soon found himself at the last page of the book, which brought some sadness to him. He wondered what did Van Dijk even mean by skip any parts he didn't understand. The book was clear and consistent with the theories and teachings it was saying, and he didn't find any difficulty reading it. He then opened another book, something about white magic and its uses, and finished it all in about half an hour. It talked in length about white magic and how it can be used not only for oneself but for others. It is in this book considered the highest form of selfless magic, as it creates protections and barriers, and even delves into healing magic, which is the property of the holy churches. As a matter of fact, the divine magic of the church is considered white magic, while white magic encompasses a bit more than just the divine magic, since its users don't even need to be followers of the church. More books in front of Ludwig explained about all the schools of magic, including the 5 towers of magic. The White Tower of Wisdom specializes in restorative spells, cures, protective magic, wards, shields, barriers, and light magic to dispel darkness and confusion. It focuses selflessness, guidance, knowledge, and benevolence. The Red Tower of Passion. Offensive spells that do incredible damage, and not only fire, even lightning and explosions and the sort is part of the Red Tower. It may delve into chaos and large-scale devastation, even to the point of reaching the rims of dark magic, as blood magic is, although forbidden, was once a part of the Red Tower's specialty. It also touches a bit upon the emotional part, which is inherently the realm of the Blue Tower, as in intensifying one's emotion and manipulating it, since magic and emotion go hand in hand. It focuses emotion, intensity, aggression, and drive. The Blue Tower of Serenity. Inherently this tower is built around exploring the mind. It specializes in the creation of illusions, perception alteration, deception of the senses, and mind magic, it is a tower that was once prominent in the past for its uncanny ability to manipulate the opponents and make enemies allies. But once some of the restrictions of the Black Towers were removed, it no longer had the lead among the 5 towers. Its main focus is calmness, reflection, clarity, and subtlety. The Grey Tower of Neutrality, which is the steadiest of the towers when it comes to internal politics, and also the most mysterious, since it delves into domains far from what can be considered normal. It also acts as an arbiter in the matters of the 5 towers, maintaining the equilibrium of the 5 towers without leaning into any tower's favors. Its main studies would contain transmutation magic of all forms, alchemy, etheric formless magic, such as emotion and even time magic to a certain point. It focuses on balance, transformation, impartiality, and adaptability. Last but not least, the Black Tower of Power. The Black Tower had begun by delving into all sort of dark magic at first, including but not limited to necromancy, fear, ancient powers, soul magic, and curse magic. However, these studies brought more harm than good, creating vile and vicious individuals who sought to reach their goals no matter the cost, even at the cost of selling their souls to demons and devils. The Great Magic War had started due to one of their tower masters having abused that dark power and costed the magic world a great deal of its most powerful mags. Due to that, the Grey Tower of Neutrality had imposed sanctions and prohibitions on the Black Tower of Power, limiting their research range and forbidding several parts of their curriculum. Necromancy, curse magic, all forms of dark magic including demonic rituals and summoning were banned for use. And they were only allowed to study hex magic and the ability to fight against the dark arts, which although it limited their power and range by a great deal, no one has the ability to say that the Black Tower is actually the weakest of the bunch yet, as it still harbors some of the most powerful mags of the continent. Each tower governs a distinct philosophical or emotional spectrum, with magic schools tied to these core traits. The White Tower serves the common good, the Red Tower indulges in intensity and destruction, the Blue Tower seeks harmony and subtlety, the Grey Tower pursues neutrality and change, while the Black Tower craves control and often delves into dangerous or morally questionable powers. However, something nagged at Ludwig. He was killed and resurrected by necromancers, yet the books were explicit in stating that necromancy was banned and heavily sanctioned. How then had these necromancers been allowed to bring him back? Shouldn't this have warranted an investigation or retribution? Something's rotten in Denmark, Ludwig muttered. He pondered the inconsistencies he had uncovered. The necromancers had defied the rules set by the Grey Tower of Neutrality, the very institution that had imposed strict restrictions on the use of necromancy. Yet, they had done so without fear of reprisal. This suggested either corruption or a deeper conspiracy at play within the towers. Ludwig's mind continued to churn with possibilities. Could the Black Tower still be practicing forbidden magic in secret, undermining the laws set forth by the other towers? And what role did Van Dijk play in all of this? The Tower Master had clearly defied many conventions, but to what end? His grip on the book tightened. The path ahead was fraught with danger and uncertainty, but now he had knowledge, a tool that could be as powerful as any weapon. He would continue to read, to learn, and to uncover the truths hidden in the shadows of this world. Chapter 12 How to Necromancy? Ludwig continued reading, so engrossed in the flow of knowledge that he didn't notice the hours slip away. The only thing breaking his concentration were the steady notifications indicating that his intelligence was gradually increasing. At first, it was every few pages, then it became every half of a book, and then every full book. Eventually, it was only after every 3 books that a point would be added to his intelligence. The frequency of the notifications began to slow down, but Ludwig used them as subconscious markers for how much time had passed. Before he knew it, he was staring at the last book of the pile he had been given. He had finished it all in less than a single day. The books ranged from basic geography to political intrigue, even touching on the fundamentals of magic. Every word felt like sustenance to Ludwig, who devoured the information like a parched sponge soaking up water. His thirst for knowledge, especially of this foreign world, was insatiable, something he had never expected of himself. More, Ludwig muttered, his hollow voice breaking the silence of the room. He looked up at the tall library shelves, rows upon rows of books brimming with untold secrets. But the memory of the searing pain from before resurfaced, making him hesitate. That agonizing experience, when he had first attempted to read advanced magic tomes, was still fresh in his mind. He stood there for a moment, wrestling with the decision. The logical part of him knew that pain would come again. But what other choice did he have? Sitting idle wasn't an option, and he was desperate for more knowledge, desperate for an edge in this unfamiliar, hostile world. With a resigned sigh, Ludwig steeled himself and walked back to the shelf where he had previously found the book on necromancy basics. He hesitated for only a moment before picking it up again. As his skeletal fingers gripped the cover, he felt the familiar sensation of impending pain stir in the back of his mind. Well, here we go again, he thought bitterly as he resumed where he had left off. The text flowed before his eyes, but the pangs of pain immediately resurfaced. He pressed on, his will overriding the warnings from his system that constantly reminded him of his insufficient level. The book delved deeper into necromancy, introducing him to the arcane mechanics of raising the dead. To call forth a being from the realm of death, the book explained, one needs more than just bones or remains. The process required specific items. For skeletal creatures, one needed a good portion of their structure. For more ethereal beings, like ghosts or banshees, an object tied to their existence, something they had once cherished in life, was necessary to anchor their spirit. Necromancy wasn't simply about manipulating corpses. The author sneered at those who viewed necromancers as nothing more than puppeteers of flesh. Any charlatan in a market can pull off a convincing enough trick, the text claimed. But we, as mags, deal in the realm of souls. The crucial element in necromancy was the soul, not the body. Without a soul, the reanimated were nothing more than hollow husks. And the soul, the book continued, is not something you can simply take or control. It must be asked for, and this request is made to none other than Deus Necros, the Lord of Death. Deus Necros, an entity both feared and revered, holds the souls of the departed. No necromancer truly owns a soul, they merely borrow it from necros after paying tribute. The tribute was straightforward: mana. The more mana the necromancer could offer, the more powerful the soul they could summon. The stronger the mana, the more advanced the creature that could be raised from the dead. Some gods would ask you to either be pious and benevolent and pay their tribute with your devotion and mana, and technically that is a more expensive expenditure, since you pay twice the amount, but the only difference is you obtain something more. For Lux, the Lord of Light, you not only need to chant a prayer in his name, then pay the equivalent value of mana to call upon his power to either heal or eradicate the enemy, you also have to mean it. Only then can you use some of the Lux Church's skills and spells. Though granted, the power of the spell becomes incredibly stronger the more religious and pious one is. As for the entities of the darker side, such as evil gods, they would require worship in more gruesome and revolting payments. One shouldn't be too shocked to see entire towns and cities sacrificed for an evil god to allow them to use some of their skills. The price here is both the user's mana and the sacrifice, though the sacrifice doesn't necessarily have to be others. The evil gods don't care if you pay portions of your soul even to use their might. Necromancy, however, was an entirely different beast. Deus Necros, despite his simplicity, didn't offer much help beyond lending a soul. Once summoned, controlling the undead was a challenge that each necromancer had to master on their own. Many an inexperienced necromancer had tried to summon powerful entities, only to be slain by the very creatures they had brought back. Without the proper understanding of control, a necromancer could easily lose their life at the hands of their own creation. The text became more technical, detailing the resurrection of simpler creatures, like rats. Ludwig's mind buzzed as a magical sigil appeared in front of him, etched in glowing light. You have learned basic undead resurrection sigil. Chapter 13 Pop Quiz. The sigil was awkward, to say the least. It was composed of concentric circles, each containing strange symbols between the layers, twisting and turning into one another like some ancient code. Ludwig stared at it, his skeletal mind racing to understand its form and purpose. Yet, despite its intricate design, the sigil was surprisingly simple for him to remember. It etched itself into his consciousness the moment he laid eyes on it, as if it had been waiting for him all along. Once memorized, the sigil would serve as a contract between the caster and Deus Necros himself. Channeling mana into the sigil was the key to opening the path between the world of the living and the shadowed realm of the dead. The sigil allowed the caster to summon a soul back into its once-living body, but not to life, only to undeath. The resurrected wouldn't be truly alive, only an animated shell filled with the soul's lingering essence. Ludwig reread that part carefully, almost feeling the weight of responsibility settle over him like a heavy cloak. There was no going back once the process started. Healing the undead was impossible and would actually cause them great harm. The dead were not meant to be restored to life. Any attempt to force that change would incur consequences both magical and divine. More importantly, the text emphasized, the soul was never truly yours. It was borrowed, a loan granted by Deus Necros. And the loan must be returned. Failure to do so, whether by keeping the soul too long or attempting to change its nature, would result in dire consequences, angering the god who jealously guarded the souls of the departed. Trust me, it's not worth it, the book warned in an ominous tone. The words lingered in Ludwig's mind, growing darker with every passing thought. Once the sigil was complete and mana funneled into it, the gate between realms would open. Though the gate was invisible to mortal eyes, its power was undeniable, and the summoned soul would regain its former body. Ludwig couldn't help but wonder how it worked, how a skeleton without tendons or muscles could move. But that was where the magic came into play. The mana supplied by the caster animated the corpse, taking the place of the physical connections that were no longer present. The undead would remain active as long as the caster's mana flowed into it. However, once the connection was established, the caster couldn't simply cut off the mana flow. The undead would persist, so long as there was mana to fuel it. Ludwig's thoughts were racing now. Was he really ready for this? Could he actually summon something from the dead? The book posed a final, almost taunting question. So, are you willing to risk bringing back a rat? Or are you too terrified to even try? Not gonna lie, Ludwig muttered. I really would like to try that, but there are no rats in sight. He sighed, massaging his temples out of habit. His skeletal fingers scratched against the surface of his skull, emitting an eerie screeching sound that only worsened his headache. The dull throbbing in his mind was a constant reminder of the burden he now carried. A voice suddenly cut through the silence, cold and sharp. Rats? But there are. Ludwig froze. That voice. He recognized it immediately. Van Dijk was standing behind him, his presence as unsettling as ever. The Tower Master had a way of appearing without warning, as if he moved through the very shadows themselves, always watching, always waiting. Ludwig turned slowly, his hollow eyes meeting Van Dijk's gaze. There was something sinister in the man's expression, a mix of curiosity and amusement as he watched the skeleton mage struggle with the weight of his newfound knowledge. Ludwig swallowed hard, though he had nothing to swallow. A nervous tick left over from his previous life, a useless gesture in his current state. Still, the terror was real. Seems like you were busy yesterday, Van Dijk remarked casually, though his voice was lined with a predatory edge. Or perhaps you got too bored with the books I gave you and decided to read something more advanced. Only then did Ludwig realize how much time had passed. The sun had already risen, its light filtering through the high windows of the study. He had spent the entire night reading, consumed by the words and the knowledge they contained. His hunger for understanding had blinded him to the passing hours. I have already finished the books, Ludwig responded cautiously, unsure of how Van Dijk would react. Van Dijk's brows furrowed, a mixture of skepticism and intrigue crossing his face. Did you, now? Did you perhaps only pick one up? Because there are more than 100 books here, Van Dijk said, gesturing to the stacks scattered across the table. All the books, Master Van Dijk, Ludwig affirmed. Van Dijk's frown deepened as he moved closer, his long fingers tracing the spines of the books. With one hand, he picked up a random volume and flipped through it, his eyes scanning the pages. Northern Sea, he said, stopping abruptly midway through the book. What is the name of the fleshless guardian protecting the endless peak? Ludwig's bony brow furrowed in concentration. The Northern Sea has no mountains, Master. It's a cold, icy expanse of water. The endless peak lies within the territory of the Azure Eternal Dragon, though its exact location is unknown. As for the fleshless guardian, he's the strongest known knight of undeath, and his name is Mordzander. Van Dijk's expression shifted into a pleased smirk. Oh, quite the scholar, aren't we? I suppose you really did read everything. Then, I was hoping for a trick question to catch you off guard. His eyes gleamed with amusement, though there was something darker lurking beneath the surface. How did you do it? He asked. Ludwig remained calm, gesturing towards the book still in Van Dijk's hand. Master, the book is upside down, and it's about proper etiquette at a tower academy. That's how I knew. For a moment, there was silence, then a low chuckle escaped Van Dijk's lips. His grin widened. Well, you're becoming more expressive, more capable of independent thought. I see I'll need to adjust my plans for you, he said, as if to himself. Without another word, Van Dijk reached into his coat and pulled out a small jar, placing it directly in front of Ludwig. Inside the jar was a piece of rotting flesh, old and withered, inscribed with faint runes barely visible to the naked eye. Let's see if you've truly learned something, Van Dijk said, his voice low and filled with expectation. His eyes burned with dark excitement. Let's bring you back to life. Chapter 14 Into the Black Tower Academy. I thought that was quite the taboo, especially with Deus Necros and all. Did I read wrong? Ludwig asked, hesitantly glancing at Van Dijk. The thought of necromancy and manipulating death was still unsettling to him, and yet here he was, under the tutelage of one of the most fearsome necromancers in existence. Van Dijk's expression shifted into a smile, but it wasn't one of warmth. Indeed it is taboo, but that's not what I meant. To bring you back to life would be something only a fool would attempt, and I assure you, I am no fool, he said, his voice dripping with pride. He gestured dismissively toward Ludwig's skeletal form. However, I can fake your presence. It's pointless for you to remain here in this state. Ludwig frowned, genuinely confused. How come? He questioned, daring to push for more information. Van Dijk's smile faded into a hard line. I hate those who ask too many questions, he growled. I apologize, Master, Ludwig replied quickly, bowing his head slightly, his skeletal fingers clenching in anxiety. He had to remember his place. Despite his increasing intelligence and freedom of thought, he was still under Van Dijk's control. Good, Van Dijk said, satisfied with Ludwig's submission. Now, the reason I don't want you lingering in this tower is that you possess intelligence far greater than any other undead I've encountered. You reason and think, and your capacity for both seems to grow by leaps and bounds with each passing day. It's as though you're unlocking more of your potential with every second. You need to cultivate that potential, so I'll be sending you to the Black Tower Academy. Ludwig's hollow eyes widened at this revelation. The idea of going out into the world, interacting with others, wasn't something he had even considered a possibility since his death. And yet, here was Van Dijk suggesting it. But the Black Tower Academy? He had read enough to know what it was. A place where the arcane was studied with unparalleled dedication, a center of magical learning. However, he couldn't ignore his appearance. I would guess that thing, Ludwig pointed at the jar still in Van Dijk's hand, has something to do with all that. Indeed, Van Dijk said, grinning. Quite the smart lad, aren't we? You see, this is no ordinary jar. Inspect it, and you'll see for yourself. Ludwig complied, focusing his mind on the jar as he muttered, Inspect. Symbio slime. Category, consumable. Description. A slime created by an unknown mage. It is able to mimic the fleshly build of its carrier. I don't understand, Ludwig said, frowning again as he tried to process the information. Van Dijk sighed, rolling his eyes in exasperation. I guess you're not as smart as I thought. Do you think you can attend an academy looking like that? He gestured toward Ludwig's skeletal body, waving his hand up and down. No one's going to let a walking pile of bones attend lectures on elemental magic or alchemy. Ludwig looked down at himself, his stark white bones reflecting the dim light in the room. I suppose a bony skeleton would be quite the sight. Not just that, Van Dijk continued, his tone growing more serious. Remember, necromancy is banned and forbidden in most circles, especially at the academy. This slime will allow you to appear human, or at least, like you once did. Without further explanation, Van Dijk tossed the slime at Ludwig. The writhing, gelatinous creature immediately latched onto his bones, creeping into the crevices between his ribs, slithering up his spine, and binding itself to every inch of his skeletal frame. Ludwig tensed, his instinctual horror of the living mass crawling over his dead form making him freeze in place. The sensation was unsettling, but soon it subsided, and when Ludwig glanced down at his hands, he gasped. Skin had appeared, his skin. His bones were now covered in flesh, pale but real, with nails, hair, and the appearance of veins. His face, reflected in a nearby mirror, looked exactly as it had before his death. It was a strange, hollow sensation though, as he couldn't truly feel any of it. It was a shell, external and false. Good, quite the handsome fellow we were, Van Dijk said, pleased with the result. This slime will fool anyone around the 6th circle of magic. For those above that, they'll need to be incredibly scrutinous to realize something's off. Don't waste it, it's one of my precious tools. Van Dijk flung a heavy coat over Ludwig's newly fleshed shoulders. You can't sense yet, but cover up for now. I'll send those two fools, Sebas and Evan, to fetch you some proper clothes later. Thank you, Master, Ludwig replied. Despite his state of undeath, there was something oddly comforting about being clothed in flesh again, even if it was fake. Van Dijk had given him a tool he didn't need to offer, and Ludwig couldn't help but feel a small measure of gratitude. Now, Van Dijk continued, his tone turning instructional once again. Since you've finished reading the basic materials I provided, you'll need to further advance your studies. At the academy, you'll be paired with students around your age. I'll be sending you with a recommendation letter, and you'll be admitted as a transfer student. Study well, live like a human for now. I'm sure you still remember how to, deep down. I believe so, Ludwig replied, uncertain but willing to comply. Also, whenever you're done with classes for the day, come back to the tower to continue your advanced studies. Don't mingle too much with the other students. There's always the risk of exposing yourself. The symbio slime isn't impervious to damage, and if it takes too much, it will begin sapping your mana to sustain its form. Don't make trouble for yourself, Van Dijk warned. I'll keep that in mind, Master Van Dijk, Ludwig said, bowing slightly. He felt odd, receiving so many warnings. The academy would likely be full of young mags, people his age, or at least, the age he had once been. Could he truly pass as one of them? Good. Now, look out that window, Van Dijk said, pointing through the narrow frame. Far in the distance, a small pyramid-shaped tower was barely visible beyond a sprawling hill. That's the Black Tower Academy. You'll be spending the next few years there, amassing knowledge. What I have in this tower is far more advanced than what you'll find there, but without a basic understanding of magic, everything in my study is meaningless to you. Keep a low profile, but excel in your studies. Destroy your peers in academics, if possible. I don't want my only pupil to be a blundering fool. A new quest has been added. Difficulty, B+. Quest, study at the Black Tower Academy. Description. You have been tasked with learning at the Black Tower Academy, where you'll have access to vast resources and knowledge. Advance your understanding of magic over the course of a minimum of 3 years. Quest rewards. Reward scale based on your achievements at the academy. Final reward. Class change to Skeleton Mage. Do you wish to accept this quest? Yes, no? Ludwig considered declining for a brief moment. He could just leave once outside Van Dijk's tower, complete the eternal quest of escaping Van Dijk's control. He was desperate for freedom, after all. But before he could make a decision, the system overrode his thoughts. Quest automatically accepted. Failure to comply with the quest will result in death. Failure to follow Bostos van Dijk's instructions will result in death. Attempting to escape the academy premises without permission will result in death. Brother. Ludwig muttered under his breath as he read the endless list of death-related consequences tied to the quest. Van Dijk's sharp hearing didn't miss the muttered word, but he chose not to comment. Instead, he simply smirked. Once your clothes arrive, you'll depart for the academy. Make sure to return here every night for additional study. I've placed some materials in this ring, he said, handing Ludwig a second storage ring. Take a couple of books with you if you feel like torturing yourself with more reading, but no necromancy, no dark magic, and absolutely no curses at the academy. Even I can't save you if you're caught dabbling in those. Thank you, Master, Ludwig replied, accepting the ring. You've thanked me enough, Van Dijk said with a dismissive wave of his hand. Wait here until your clothes arrive, then leave for the academy as soon as possible. With that, Van Dijk turned and left, once again leaving Ludwig alone with his thoughts. The academy loomed in the distance, an entirely new chapter in Ludwig's strange existence, where survival would depend not on strength or combat, but on his ability to outwit his fellow students and conceal the truth of what he really was. Chapter 15A. Step toward the academy. Not long after Van Dijk had left, Ludwig heard a soft knock on the door. He hesitated, unsure whether to respond. If it was Van Dijk, the door would open without permission, as the necromancer always made his presence known whether desired or not. But if it was Sebas and Evan, those two loathsome necromancers, they would have no choice but to wait outside. After a moment of silence, the familiar voice of Sebas seeped through the wooden door like a creeping fog. Master Van Dijk, we've brought the rest of the items you requested. We'll be leaving now, he said, his voice oozing disdain even in servitude. Ludwig waited, listening as their footsteps slowly faded down the spiral staircase, their voices hushed and unintelligible. Cowards, Ludwig thought to himself, rage simmering beneath his calm surface. He wasn't fond of those two. They'd killed him, after all, and despite his current state of undeath, that was not something easily forgiven. After a while, the door creaked open on its own. Ludwig turned, finding a small pile of neatly folded black clothes resting on the stone floor, accompanied by a letter, a silver chain necklace, a modest wand, and a set of shimmering potions. Without much thought, Ludwig approached the items. He was still naked, though it no longer bothered him in the way it would have before. Even though he felt no chill, the bare bones were a stark reminder of what he had become. Dead, but not resting. Inspect, Ludwig whispered, casting the skill Van Dijk had once taught him. Academy simple robes. Category, light clothes. Description, basic attire for students of the Black Tower Academy. Durable, but unadorned. The fabric felt strange against his bony hands. Although he couldn't physically feel the warmth of the cloth, its presence gave a vague sense of normalcy. Clothes. Something to disguise the horror of his fake skin-covered skeletal frame. Next, he picked up the necklace. Necklace of access. Tier, rare. Description, a necklace handcrafted by Bostos van Dijk for his only pupil, Ludwig. Grants access to the majority of the Black Tower Academy facilities, including classrooms, laboratories, and common rooms. Does not permit entry to high-security areas such as the library's third level and the administrative offices. The necklace shimmered faintly under the dim light of the study. Ludwig felt a strange sentiment bloom within him, though it quickly died as he reminded himself that this was no genuine gift. It was merely another tool Van Dijk had given to maintain control. Lastly, Ludwig inspected the potions. Minor health potion. Tier, minor potion. Description, a simple concoction brewed by an apprentice alchemist. Restores up to 300 health points. Minor mana potion. Tier, minor potion. Description, a basic magical elixir capable of restoring 300 mana points. Everything was in place for his departure to the academy. The letter, folded neatly atop the robes, was Van Dijk's recommendation letter, ensuring Ludwig's smooth entry into the Black Tower Academy. Everything had been prepared. It was time. Ludwig dressed himself in the black robes, the fabric hanging loosely over his newly covered flesh. Though he had no need for warmth, it felt oddly comforting to have a layer of normality wrapped around his body. But there was no mirror in the room to check his appearance, and Ludwig found himself shrugging at the thought. He had no vanity anymore. It didn't matter how he looked. Not in this life. Steeling himself, Ludwig stepped toward the door. He cracked it open cautiously, peering down the spiraling staircase to ensure no one lingered nearby. The coast was clear. Taking a deep, unnecessary breath, he made his way down the stairs, his footfalls echoing eerily in the empty tower. As Ludwig approached the bottom floor, the grand door leading outside loomed before him. He hesitated, reaching for the handle, but before his fingers could wrap around the cold metal, someone grabbed him from behind and slammed him into the wall. "It's you, filthy thing," a familiar voice sneered, venom dripping from every word. Ludwig twisted his head to face his attacker, his hollow eyes meeting the cruel gaze of Siebes. Rage, hot and seething, surged through him, threatening to consume his every thought. His bony fingers twitched with the urge to retaliate, to destroy this man who had once taken his life. But the grip around his body tightened, and Siebes forced him harder against the wall, pressing until Ludwig's bones creaked. "Evan, check this out. The fucker's trying to fight back." Siebes laughed as if it was some sick game. His twisted smile gleamed in the dim light as he wrenched Ludwig's arm, dislocating it out of place with an audible crack. -20 HP. You are in a hostile environment. Your enemy is far stronger than you. Your right arm has been temporarily crippled. Above Siebes's head, Ludwig could now see his name glowing in bright red, Siebes Murong. Ludwig considered inspecting him, but Van Dijk's warning echoed in his mind. Don't use that ability on people. Siebes would feel it, and that could trigger a fight Ludwig wasn't prepared to win. His rational mind urged him to stay calm, but something deep within him, something primal, screamed for revenge. He wanted to tear Siebes apart, to rip him limb from limb, to feast on his misery. But he knew better. He was weak, still level 1, and barely capable of defending himself. "Calm down, Siebes," came Evan's voice from behind. He stepped forward, his name glowing in a yellow hue, with question marks hovering above his status. "That's the master's pet. You can't break him." Siebes sneered, his grip tightening once more before he shoved Ludwig back against the wall. "This creep should have stayed dead. I guess the master keeps you around for some sick, twisted fantasy. Begone." He released Ludwig, dismissing him as if he were nothing more than trash. Ludwig's anger flared once more, but he bit back his rage. He knew better than to fight. Siebes was leagues above him, probably dozens if not hundreds of levels higher. Any attempt at retaliation would be suicide. Ludwig understood this world well enough to know that levels mattered, and right now, he was nothing. "Don't you go blabbering to anyone at the academy about what we do here," Siebes growled, his face inches from Ludwig's. "The headmaster might know about Van Dijk's shady experiments, but if word spreads that we're dabbling in necromancy, I'll make sure you cease to exist. Understand me? I can fend off the charges, but you won't survive one of my spells." Ludwig remained silent, as was expected of an undead servant. But inwardly, he was seething. His hatred for Siebes grew with every word the necromancer spoke. "Someday," Ludwig thought, "someday, you'll pay." Evan, who had been standing back and watching, finally stepped in. "Siebes, you blundering idiot," he muttered, dragging his companion away. "You just gave away our position. What if he does talk, even by accident? Necromancers still banned in the academy. You've only made things worse." Siebes rolled his eyes, scoffing at the idea. "We've got Bostos to back us up. Let them come with their torches and pitchforks. We'll be fine." Evan sighed heavily, face-palming in frustration. "You're an idiot, Siebes. Now, he'll be thinking of ways to frame us. I'll have to inform the master. Maybe he'll warn the skeleton to keep his mouth shut." The two bickered as they left the tower, their voices fading as they walked away. Ludwig stood there, still against the wall. He propped his dislocated arm back, and it felt sickening, not the fact that the pop was disturbing, but the fact he didn't feel a thing during the entire incident. Slowly, he pushed himself up and adjusted his robe, his fury simmering beneath his calm exterior. They think I'm nothing. They treated him like garbage, like some mindless puppet. But that wouldn't last forever. He made a mental note of their conversation, their threats, and their arrogance. One day, Ludwig thought darkly, one day, they'll regret this. He turned toward the door once again, pushing it open with a renewed sense of determination. The world outside greeted him with cold air and the distant hum of life. Far in the distance, the Black Tower Academy stood like a beacon of knowledge and power, its dark spires reaching toward the sky. Ludwig took a deep breath, unnecessary but symbolic, and stepped forward. His path was set.